Our source material today is going to be these packaging pieces. These came from Lenovo laptops. So in each of the cases that contained a laptop, there was one of these clamping it at either end. They are made from, if we can see that, LDPE number 4. So this is low density polyethylene, but actually it feels pretty tough for LDPE. It is already recycled, but we're going to see if we can recycle it again. I am going to cut this up into pieces because if I try to put it, well, for one thing it's too big for my sandwich toaster to recycle it, but also if I try to put this in as it is, what we'll find is that piece there will close up and it'll trap a pocket of air inside there. So I'm going to cut this into strips that can be put into the recycle process. Keeping my fingers well out of the way of the blade because it's quite a tough material to cut. But we should find that when I do this that I can cut, I don't know, I'll cut along there or something like that. Okay, so we have a large pile of cut up pieces. I'm not going to go any smaller than that, I don't think. Let's get the sandwich toaster fired up and recycle some of this plastic. So while we're waiting for the sandwich toaster to warm up, I'm going to answer the most common questions that I get in all of my HDPE and plastic recycling videos. First question is, why am I using a sandwich toaster and not a toaster oven or a pan over a hob or other things like that? Well, I'm using what I've got. So I have got a sandwich toaster. I have found that recycling plastic in the oven tends to burn the resin, so I tend to use this because it heats up to just the right temperature, which is about 180 degrees centigrade. That just works for me really well. Second question is, why don't I cut up my plastic in a garden shredder or a food processor or whatever? Well, I've tried lots of different methods for cutting this up, and this plastic is really rather tough. HDPE and LDPE resins are incredibly tough plastics for their density, and I've just found that I know you can get plastic shredders, and I think probably if I had a Blendtec I'd be able to shred it up in that, but I've tried it in a food processor and I have tried it in a garden shredder, and neither of those things worked for me, so I just tend to cut it up by hand. I'm not recycling on a vast scale anyway. Third question is, what are these sheets that I use? So I use these sheets to prevent the plastic from sticking to the hot plate. These are reusable baking sheets. They're like a non-stick fabric that I bought in a cook shop, and that just helps to keep the plastic from sticking to the hot plates. That's the frequently asked questions bit. Now I think we might be up to temperature. So let's get started. So I've got a piece of this. It's got some plastic from previous melts on it, but I'm just going to flake that off now because it does just come off once it's cooled. But also I'm not unduly worried about that because I'm going to use this green resin for the main part, and I'm going to add a sprinkling of other recycled plastic on there as well. So let's get this on. Add some bits of plastic. So this is part of the reason why I cut it so small normally, is because stacking it on here when it's big pieces will tend to make it slip over itself, and it's difficult to actually arrange a significant enough amount of plastic on the hot plates here if it's not cut into smaller pieces. But today we're going to try to make an exception to that, so we're going to see how we get on with larger pieces. So let's start with just that. Bring the clamp down and get some heat on that, and it will start to melt and flow. Now what I've found I can do with this press, this sandwich press, is if I'm careful enough I can apply clamps here and here and I can just exert a little bit of force to press those plates in close contact with the plastic resin. And you just get a bit more of a quicker melt that way. Something a bit wrong with that clamp, so I'll have to use a bigger one. Right, I think we might be ready for the next little bit of plastic to get added in now. So we'll just undo the clamping force, open it up and take a look. Yep, so the first lot of plastic has melted now. So let's get some more on there. And this is a little bit easier to stack on now because it's adhering to the plastic that I put on first. Okay, so let's clamp down again, go for another heating cycle. One of the other questions people often ask me about is, what about all the fumes? Well, it turns out that HDPE and LDPE, when they're melted to just their melting temperature, don't actually produce any fumes at all. So there is no smoke coming off of here, there is no noxious vapour coming off of this HDPE. It's pretty much, this plastic is almost as benign as candle wax. It's always surprising with this plastic how much it actually melts down. A very small amount of plastic is actually used to make bottles and packaging. It's quite an economical material in that respect. It always uses quite a lot of the actual source material to produce any kind of recycled product. More than you might expect anyway. Right, third time clamping down, let's have another go. Here we go. Okay, so I think we might have enough material in there now. Let's open it up and have a look. So what we've got is maybe a 3/4 of a centimetre thick sheet of melted plastic. Now, I think what I'm going to do before we work on this any further, I might put some gloves on. I'm not going to touch the plastic itself because this stuff will stick to almost anything when it's melted, and ironically when it's set it won't stick to anything. But I'm just going to fold that into the middle like that because I think we're going to work this plastic a little bit before we have our final product. We're just going to see if we can work out any little voids and air bubbles that are in there by folding and repeated pressing. It will either work the bubbles out or it will spread them so that they don't matter so much. Okay, and then so what we're going to do now is put that sheet back on there. Now you'll notice there's some little splotches of colour there. That's from my HDPE projects from previous instances, but don't worry about that. They're not going to be a problem. So we're just going to put that on there like that. Spread that sheet out so we haven't got so much of a crease on it. And we're going to give that another squish. And then I think we'll probably fold it the other way as well, so that we've worked it twice, because this resin's not all the same colour as well, so there's a bit of a two-tone green effect going on at the moment. So, but I have a plan for how we're going to make this a little bit more, well, I don't know about aesthetically pleasing, but we're going to make it a bit more interesting as a finished product. We'll have a look at that in a minute. So I'm just going to give that a squish, which will spread it out quite significantly. I can see that it's spread out again inside of there, so we're going to give it another look now Yep, and it's spread out right across the sheet again. And so this time we're going to fold it the other way, just to even things out completely. Now at this point we can get an idea of what we might be able to do with this sheet of plastic once it's fully formed. And actually what I think I'm going to do here, I've got a plan for this, so I'm going to fold those two into the middle like that. Now get that sheet on there ready, like so. And again we're going to transfer this onto there, like that. And then this is a bit like kneading bread really. So now we're going to give it another squish. Now this doesn't take very long now because the plastic is completely soft and semi-molten. So just need to clamp that down now and give it a squash. Okay, so we're probably getting quite close to the final product now. Let's just give that one more little squish to spread it, and then let's see what we've got. Yeah, pretty good. Starting to look like a solid, well, like a singular piece of plastic now. So I've got some bubbles coming out over here, so what we're just going to do is I'm just taking a piece of the plastic, I'm just going to jab it all over like this, just to see if we can release any air from it, and then we'll give it another press. Okay, so now we've got to turn this into something, and I have a couple of interesting tricks for that. So the first one of those tricks is, if I want to press it to a constant thickness, what I do is just choose some little nuts, and I put one of them in each corner of the toaster like this, and that way we won't get anything that's thinner than the thickness of those 4 nuts. So we're going to leave that like that. The other thing I'm going to do is kind of season it with some bits of HDPE from previous projects. So this is just multicoloured high density polyethylene. I'm just going to put a scattering of that over there to give it some colour and a bit of decorative appeal. Now I don't know what that's going to look like when it's melted, but I guess we'll find out, won't we? In fact, for that reason I'm going to take these nuts out of here for the moment. I'm just going to give that back to the press, oops, just to melt that top layer in. Now I have mixed HDPE and LDPE here because this stuff is HDPE, this stuff is LDPE, but the resins are compatible. We will get some interesting little interface issues there with where this joins the other stuff, so we'll find this is a little bit tougher than that, but I don't think that's going to be a problem for us. Okay, well, even if that's not stuck in, I'm going to do something else here, because I'm going to pull this out. Yeah, we're still melting that in at the moment, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'll just pull that off like that. I'll give it a sprinkle of coloured resin pieces on top. Kind of evenly. Well, I guess we're making something a bit like pizza here, really, aren't we? Plastic pizza. Who'd have thunk it? So we've got the same amount of coloured pieces on both sides. Again, we'll get that back onto the press. I'll just get some more little bits on there, just so we haven't skimped at all. Okay, we'll get that back onto the press. I think we might go the other way round now, like that. sheet back on, and we're just going to melt that back in. Okay, now I can see it's starting to ooze out the front there, which means I've got to do something. So let's get that off the press. Let's just have a look. It's not quite melted in yet, but it's close. And we're going to take that. Looks quite pretty, doesn't it? Now this is the cunning part here, because obviously if I was to cool it with these sheets stuck to it, it'll make a big old mess and it'll pucker. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put this back into the press. Let's just check what size nuts we want to use for thickness. I think these ones will do it actually, so we're going to use the bigger nuts in the corner there for thickness. We're going to just press in these pieces that are on the sides here, although we are going to trim all of that off. And then I'm putting this directly onto the hot plate now, because it is a non-stick hot plate, so it will cope with this okay. But the last little bit needs to be done with just the press. So what we're going to do now is clamp that down until we run aground on those little metal nuts, and then we're going to turn off the heat and let it cool inside the press. So this has been cooling down for a couple of hours, and it's now only very slightly warm to the touch. You'll notice the plastic did ooze out the front there, which I think might be an interesting challenge for us. It's also stuck together. Okay. That was pretty tough, and in all honesty I don't think I've done my sandwich toaster an awful lot of good there. Also I can see some burning of the resin, so I'm not happy with this as an end result. Never mind, we might be able to do something with it still. Right, we've still got to cut this piece here to get that off. Okay, I might just be able to flex it. Okay, well the theory is sound, but in practice we have scorched the resin a little bit and we have got some little voids in there. But if I wanted to, I could actually use that as a cutting mat right away. I'm going to see if that scrapes off actually, like a scraper or something. Oh, that was hard work. Right, well that was interesting. That carbon staining there does actually come off with a bit of scrubbing, but we've still got some imperfections in this board. There's quite a large void just there where it hasn't filled in with resin. So we're going to try again. I'm going to remelt this actually, and we'll try adding a little bit more resin. We'll fold it a few more times to try and work out some of those little holes and bubbles, and then we'll try again. Last fold is this one. So we're going goes into the middle. So now I'm just going to add some more resin on top there like that, and again I'm being very careful not to get it to the edges because it makes the edges go ragged if there are pieces left there. So we'll take those away just like that. Okay, let's just clear away those little bits at the edge there. Okay, so now we are on the last squeeze now. Okay, so let's have a look at the results second time around. Wonky handheld footage, I'm afraid, because I've put the tripod away. But let's see what we ended up with this time. Now look at that, that's actually pretty good. There are a few little surface imperfections, and that's probably where I added those coloured pieces, where just to give it some sort of highlight. I probably just shouldn't have done that, actually, but anyway, that is actually a rock solid piece of plastic now. So it's got a tiny little lip on that edge and that edge where it slipped out and squeezed out of the side of the thing, and it's not completely straight and flat, but I think we can make a chopping board out of that, so that's what we'll do tomorrow. Okay, so we've got this kind of pancake board. Let's turn this into a chopping board. So we'll just clamp it down. Now that's got a bit of a wobble on it, but that will only hopefully be on one side. So let's clamp it down to the bench and we'll trim off these rough edges. Now I'm going to go for a kind of a asymmetric polygon type of shape here, I think. So let's just cut right there. So what we're going to try to do here is figure out the amount we cut off to make the minimal wastage. But also I want to end up with a fairly interesting shape. Now the rather wonderful thing about HDPE when it's in blocks like this is it will cut with pretty much any hand tool that will cut wood. Right, there we go. So got a nice irregular polygon shape there, and I think now we need to cut a hole in it for hanging and gripping. Now to clean up the edges, I'm just going to take a little block plane along them, and that creates a very fine surface. Let's go for about there, I think, gives us some space. Okay, so we just deburr that very carefully by sliding a sharp knife around it like that. That's good. So yes, it has got a slight bow in it, which means it doesn't work both ways up very well. It's a little bit Bit of a bulge on that side. However, there we go, half decent chopping board. Less than half decent apple, but let's just see. There we go, yeah, well, that works just fine, as indeed it should, you know, as a chopping board. So, I probably shan't use this as a culinary chopping board. I'll probably keep this in my workshop upstairs and use it for chopping and cutting non-food items when I need a really sturdy cutting mat and I don't want to cut the table. But had I used different materials, so if I'd used milk bottles instead of the recycled plastic, then I could have quite easily made a food grade cutting board today. So there we go, hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you again soon.